Thank you, Brad. I am Stephen Parsons, and I'm the past chair for the Atlantic Woodworkers Association and currently the webmaster. The AWA looks to add value to members, and we were really delighted when one of our members a while back ago discovered Colin's offer to speak to small clubs and associations like ours. Colin is a YouTube celebrity for many woodworkers around the world, including myself. I'm one of 550,000 or so subscribers to his channel, and his channel gets millions of hits, and in fact is consistently ranked in the top few woodworking sites on YouTube. So we're so delighted, really, Colin, to have you here with us tonight. My understanding is, Colin, you're going to share with us tonight a few useful jigs in the shop, maybe some of your favorite joints or joinery, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about your own journey in YouTube. So that's about it. I'm going to leave it up to you, Colin. And again, thank you and welcome to the Atlantic Woodworkers Association.
Well, thanks, Stephen, and thanks for inviting me, and hello to everyone. I can't see all of you right now because I have a pretty large screen, and I do that so that I can see what I'm doing, because the last time I did one of these, and what was happening was I had dropped the line, and people were trying to phone me to tell me to reconnect, and I finally decided I should maybe answer that phone, and I was offline for about 4 or 5 minutes, and I reconnected. So I got some new equipment that, so hopefully that's not going to happen. So that way I can monitor, but I am watching and listening, and I'm finding that there is a bit of this connection. We're about as coast to coast as you can get in Canada. I'm on I'm on Vancouver Island, so I'm about as far west as I can get, and you folks are about as far east as you can get. Yes, I am a YouTuber, and I mentioned that the only YouTuber that I could remember who had a channel earlier than me was the Wood Whisperer. I currently have 540 some videos online. Even that makes me giggle because I can't imagine anybody doing that over the years, but over that many years you've done that. And I looked at the stats the other day, 70 million people have watched my videos. And Stephen mentioned that there's 550,000 subscribers. But here's one statistic that floors me. The people that watch my videos aren't even subscribers, and that just kind of blows me away. So, but I watch a lot of videos too that I'm not subscribers to. So today I want to go through some of my favorite jigs, and I've got quite a lineup of them. So we'll go through them fairly quickly. The jigs that I've made and that I use a lot because they're so handy to me. So I'm going to start off today with what we used to call in the old days a replicating jig, and now they call it an L fence. And I'm going to switch over to another video so you can see it. I'm still going to have the audio, but I'm going to go over to there. So what this is, as I say, they call it now, I guess somebody kind of reinvented it. It's called an L fence. And what I discovered years ago is that these are steel on here. So when I mount the fence, and it's just, you can see in the end there, it's just rabbited in there so that it sits in there. And I use something called a magnetic switch. And these are, I first discovered these things about 15 years ago. And the way they work is when you turn this little, you can't move that thing. That's almost impossible to move. And they actually come in different sizes. This is a 150 pound. There's also a smaller one. I think this is a 60 pound. But I use the bigger ones a lot. And on this, the way they work, they fit on a 3/4 inch piece of board, and you just cut a hole, kind of an oblong hole. You can cut a circular hole too. And you can use the little screw holes if you want, but I don't bother with that. And push it down firmly, and when you turn that magnet and lock that in there, it's impossible to move that. So it's really on there nice and sturdy. Now the L fence has only really one adjustment, and that is the front of this moves up and down a little bit. And the purpose of that, the main thing with this fence is this board needs to be parallel, and you really want a nice straight finish on that, because this is going to be your new fence. And the way it works, when I put this on here, and I'm just going to do a simple cut first of all. The other thing I should mention, I am going to do a cut today, but I have installed a 7 1/4 just circular saw blade, and I've done that for a couple of reasons. It's a lot quieter, it doesn't throw up sawdust, and I'm not going to use the dust collector today. So that's the blade I'm going to be using. Now I've got some spalted wood here that I picked up not very long ago, and you know, as much as you can get live edge wood around my parts, you can get it all over the place. But sometimes it's not using. That's pretty ugly wood there. In fact, this wood really isn't that usable because it's so thin. It's really scrapped wood. And there's the live edge side, and it isn't that pretty either. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the back side of this and make it straight, because I might want to glue it or do something with this. And there's no, other than running it a million times through a jointer, you could bandsaw it and cut it, but when I run it through this, I can get a really super quick cut, quick, and it's easy, and it has multiple, you know, there's multiple things you can do with it. So the way this works is, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to be using this anti-skid material, and I don't know if you are familiar with this, but I use this a lot in my workshop. I think it was, and this stuff I go through, I buy this stuff at the local hardware store. I go through a year, a roll or two, because I cut it up and cut it into little pieces and so on. Now, what I'm going to do, because this is the wood that I'm going to be cutting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pencil and mark where I want to cut off. And I'm just going to go something like that, just so I have a reference. It doesn't have to be pretty. Now, when I set up this L fence, the first thing it has to have fence, and the blade, first of all, needs to be just barely above the material, and that's pretty common. We always set our saw blades about a half tooth above the material. It's easier to move the camera, but so what I'm going to do, I'm going to move this L fence, and I'm going to move it. I'm just going to measure it, but in this case, I'm just going to eyeball it, and it's about a 1/16, no, maybe not even 1/4 of an inch proud of the blade. So if I move this out, you would be able to see the blade there. Maybe you can see that's where that blade is. So what I'm going to do now is, and this is the beauty of this. So I'm going to lay this. This is just a board that I have that happens to be. What I'm going to do is lower my fence now, so it's just barely above the blade. There, and right there. And what I'm going to do now, in a second, I'm going to turn the saw on, and without moving anything, I'm going to put that in there and run that whole thing through. Now, the beauty of this and why it's a good way of cutting is because there's nothing to bind the wood underneath. It's just going to fall in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut that now. So there's a piece of wood that I cut, and you can see there's nothing to bind it, so it just lays there after it's cut. And I didn't cut enough off of there. As you can see, I still have a little piece in here. But if we take that and hold that up against a board, I don't know if you can see that, but that is a super, even with a circular saw blade, that is a super straight cut. And you could actually use this. In fact, I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm working on a video right now that you'll be able to see in a couple of weeks or so, where I'm going to be using this as a jointer, an edge jointer with a special blade. So it's just such a super way of cutting, quickly cutting wood. Now, the other thing that I use it for, sometimes I might want to move this back for a second. Sometimes I might want to cut something at a little bit of an angle. So I just take that, put it in, and I'm just going to put it there again, just to demonstrate what you can do. And there's the angle, and that's how quick and easy it is to cut that angle. And again, this can't go anywhere because there's this much distance to the fence, so nothing can bind up in there. So it's just a really quick and easy way. In fact, I keep this, some of the jigs that I make, I don't keep in my workshop. This is one that I keep in my workshop because I use this thing. So this little jig I came up with years ago. I came up with several years ago, and because the deck of my tables, or my drill press is steel, I can use these magnetic switches, and there's those same sort of oblong holes. I think they're 1 3/8, and they're just offset. I just use a Forstner bit and make 2 of them, and then the magnetic switches just fit in there like that. And what's nice about this is you can set that in any position that you want, whatever you're cutting, and now you can run your wood through it wherever. You know, if you mark something on your wood, and maybe you've got a series of holes, you can lock that down and just keep running that through. The one thing that I tell people about drill presses is that they can be one of the most dangerous. I think I can zoom that. Yeah, one of the most dangerous tools. And the reason for that is drill presses are geared so low that when something happens, especially if you're using a bigger bit, like a bigger Forstner bit or a hole saw, when they're turned on and spinning like that, if you don't have some support in here, they can grab the wood or the metal and twist it back. And I actually know of one case, a friend of mine's daughter who was taking woodworking course in school, actually got her hair caught in the drill press, and fortunately it turned out okay, but it was pretty scary for people there for a short time. And you cannot, when a drill press is spinning, you cannot stop it. It's that geared that low, and that's why they can be so dangerous, and that's why you really need to have some kind of support on there. And this thing is so quick and easy. All it is a piece of plywood. It's a 3/4 inch plywood because that's how the mag switches sit. That's what they're designed to sit through. With a board, just a board through that, and there's just 3 screws holding it on there. But it's a safe, quick way of having a fence on your table saw. You could make it longer, wider. You can move it around to wherever you want, and it makes sure that you're always drilling safely. And this is a fence that I use basically every day. Every time I drill, I take this and set that up. And again, I can move my mag switches anytime I want. So that's a jig that I use a lot of. Just a quick, handy jig. I didn't design this jig. I don't know who did design it. I had made some thin strip. Made a thin strip jig a few years ago, and basically what it was a jig that if you were cutting thin strips, it worked like this, where you had a pointer here that would touch your wood, and you would cut the wood, and then it would be, of course, shorter, so the wood would move in, and you'd hit the pointer. And it worked okay, but somebody else came up with this, and this is just such a great little jig for cutting thin strips. And the way it works, you just set it up to wherever you want on your table saw. So I've got a pretty thin strip here, but the secret of this little jig is it has a little end here, so that when you're pushing it through the saw, your wood is actually going to catch on this. And the way we do that is we just have a little tab back here that is kind of a sacrificial tab, and it can move back and forth. So if I set this up, and I can actually set that to that blade height or that blade distance right there. And now when I cut some wood, I don't have to readjust anything. I can just keep putting the wood in there. Let me just show you how quick and easy this little jig is, this thin strip jig. Raise it up a little bit. There you go. Okay. And that's just how quick. If you're running strips, and I seem to be running strips quite often, whatever it is that you want to do, that's how quick and easy that little jig. And I have a video for that. If you've watched my channel, you've probably seen that particular. That is my favorite thin strip thing. There's all sorts of thin strip ripping jigs on YouTube, but that is my favorite one right there. It's just so quick and easy, and it isn't, it's pretty simple. So that one stays in my workshop.
There's also a comment about your little rubber tipped push stick.
Oh.
Folks got a charge out of.
This was somebody sent me. This was a tip or a trick sent to me from somebody in Australia, and all it is, of course, is a dowel with I call this a crutch foot. When you have a crutch and you don't want it to move around, and you can buy those at the hardware store. It's getting nicked. It has been nicked a few times, but the first time I used it, this little thing here, you wonder what that stupid thing is there that Colin put on there. The very first time I used it on my table saw, when I put it down, didn't it roll its way into the spinning blade? And then, of course, flipped up, and I went, oh, that's not very, that could be dangerous. So all that is on there. So when I lay it on my table saw, it won't roll anywhere. It stops. But that's what that's for. Just a, and I don't use it very often, but it's handy for some things, because it gives you sort of another hand. My crosscut jig. Now this really isn't anything fancy. All this does is cut, cross-cut wood, but it's set up so that it does a perfect job every time. And when I go to my sliding miter and I have a board that's too wide, this is my go-to. I just automatically pick this up. Now, but the reason I use this plastic material is that it doesn't matter whether it's moist or not, or dry. The wood doesn't expand and contract. And back in the days when I used to use wooden tracks, what happened to me once was I was setting up, I hadn't used the jig yet, and I was setting up to cut on a different saw than this. I was setting up to cut something, not with this jig, but with another jig that had wooden insert in here. And I got to about here halfway through, and that saw, you couldn't, it was a big, powerful saw. I couldn't turn the saw off, and I couldn't push it through because it had jammed. Up here, the wood had swelled so much that I couldn't push it through the track. And it scared me because it was so dangerous. So it was at that point that I started going with the plastic runners, and honestly, for safety, it's what I recommend. So again, nothing fancy. We need that. It just does a perfect job of cross-cutting. And that's all it does. And it cuts, because of the distance, it cuts wider. And the way I set this thing up, I just put you can see a cross member at the back of it. And all I did to set it up was align it to the miter slot on the back of the saw, and I tweaked it so that it was absolutely right. And I tacked it, so I had a screw in the back here, and I was able to pivot it. And then I just tacked it here, and then I put a couple of other tacks along in here. I think I used an air nailer. Then I checked it, and it was dead on. And then only then you flip it over. Now, if you're using this plastic material, what you have to be careful of, you really need to make sure that you drill this stuff out, because in the earlier days, when I first started using it, when I didn't drill it out, because the material has to extrude, when I would drive a screw in, if it wasn't the right size, what would happen is the extruded plastic would get between the wood and the miter slot material. It would gather up in there so that it actually pushed them apart. And I didn't realize that at first, that my rail was not attached properly to to whatever jig it was that I was using. So it's something that you have to be aware of. But this, of all the simplest jigs you ever get, this is about as simple as it ever gets, and this jig gets used all the time because it gives me enough room that I can cut big, wide pieces of wood, plywood, or whatever, and get perfect cuts every time. So this is actually a commercial jig. You would purchase this jig, but the reason I mention it is it's such a handy jig, at least for me. I struggled for years. I was never a fan of making mortise and tenon joints, and part of it was because I was so picky. Whenever I would make them, if they weren't absolutely perfect tight every time, I would go and remake them and try and trim them and make them shorter. And I spent a lot of time trying to make perfect mortise and tenon joints. And then I went to sliding mortises and sliding dovetails and all sorts of things. And then one day, somebody mentioned to me, actually on my channel, somebody suggested using, why don't you try dowels, or why don't you use dowels, or why don't you show us how to use dowels, or something like that. And I thought, well, I never even used dowels, so I should check it out. So this is actually a local BC company that designed this, and I actually met the person who made this years after I got it. And basically what it is, it's when you buy it sort of out of the box, there's a couple of versions of it. It basically sits so that it will give you perfect, it doesn't matter on a 3/4 inch wood, it doesn't matter which way you turn it, one way or the other, it gives you perfectly centered holes. It's designed to use on 3/4 inch material. Now, the nice thing with it is, if you're doing legs, for example, if you're doing furniture legs and you want a reveal, when you're using mortise and tenon, you've got a thick board, which I don't have one handy here. So you got a thicker board like that. Maybe your leg is going to sit like that. So you want to reveal. This is called a reveal, this thing where I'm running my finger through, because you don't want this thing always centered. And there are some doweling jigs that will center everything for you, but you might want to reveal. And the nice thing with this is you can even make your own. You can get different little attachments that, and there's not very many, there's only 2 or 3 of them that you can get, or you can make your own if you've got a specific size. And then when you put that on there and drill the holes, it basically offsets the holes enough to give you that reveal that you might be looking for, so that your leg, so if your leg is sitting like that and your apron is table apron, you have a little bit of a reveal. And of course we do reveals because that's what gives furniture depth, is when you have a shadow area. But this little jig is so handy, and you might ask, well, how do you do, this is just some holes I cut, how do you do it on the side? Well, this side, take off, because that's your clamping side, and that sits underneath like that. And now you've got a totally different configuration, and that's the configuration that allows you to make holes like that. So you can put, even in thin material, you can still get, and again, they're perfectly aligned because just because it's set for 3/4 of an inch. So if this wood wasn't rounded, I can see on the edge, if you look at the edge, you can see that it's perfectly aligned. When I do a dry fit, it's hard to get them out. So I use these colored dowels that I made that are a little bit undersized, so that I can do dry fits and take it apart easily to double check my dowel alignment. And these, I don't think I can take, these actually unscrew, and you can replace these with different sizes. This is 3/8. And that's another thing that I liked about this. It's actually stronger than the mortise and tenons that I was using, because I was often using a 1/4 inch, and 3/4 wood, I would be using a 1/4 inch, and now I can use a 3/8. And the reason the dowels are so strong is because you have strength and glue all the way around it, not just down the side, but all around. And that's what makes these things so strong. If you're making furniture, it's a strong way of doing it. But these holes are just slightly undersized for the dowel material. And I don't know how much undersized, but just slightly undersized, so that when you put the dowels in, you really struggle to pull them out, because they fit in there. The wood tends to want to grab it. So I just put a little bit of glue in all of those, put it together, and I've done some testing, and unbelievably strong and unbelievably accurate. So if you're ever looking for something that you want to add to your workshop, that's a really good, I don't get paid for this, I don't have anything to do with the company. It's just a jig that I really like, because it's just so handy, and I get enthusiastic about it because it just does so much good work for me.
Thanks, Colin.
And I don't have a ton more. Has anybody got any questions here?
Colin, there's a question here about the company that manufactures that jig. Can you share that with us?
Oh yeah, it's called Dowelmax.
Okay.
Dowelmax.com. And as I say, it's a BC company, and I have no affiliation with them. I just, as I said, I happened to meet the owner a few years after I had the jig. So this is what I use a lot. And I don't know if you saw it on my table saw. It's on the steel, and of course all it is a push stick, nothing fancy, but it's got a couple of embedded magnets on the bottom, so it sits on my steel table saw. I always know where it is, but this is a little different design. I only came up with this, well, I guess a few months ago. And the reason for this is when you've got little pieces in your table saw and you want to get them out of the way, what this allows you to do is to grab those pieces that are stuck between the blade and your fence, and you can just push them through. Yeah, well, and you know what? I'm going to be out in your way when COVID is over. My wife keeps telling me we need to go to the other coast of Canada and see what it's like. So maybe if I'm really lucky, I'll get there at a time when you're having a meeting, and we can
I hope you do.
meet in person. Yeah, that would be cool.
I hope you do. Thanks, Colin. Brad?
Yeah, I just want to echo Stephen's thanks, Colin. Thank you so much for joining us, and also for donating your time for this. I know that you have obviously a strong interest in woodworking and sharing the craft as well. And by taking some of your time and donating it to us, it really helps small clubs like this to stay to keep going in this difficult environment.
Oh,
So much.
yeah, no, I had fun. I'm glad you contacted me. It's hopefully somewhere some people, even if I didn't teach you something today, maybe there's some things that you maybe want to learn that I didn't show or explain enough, and that's all good stuff too, because that's how we learn more about woodworking.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. Just a couple of things too. One, if you are to come out to visit, come in the fall. We have a beautiful fall here on the East Coast, so come then. September, October is beautiful here, and that's when our fall meetings do start up again. So, yeah. So that's a good time to come. Also, for those unfamiliar with Colin's work, please check out his YouTube site, like his videos, give him a thumbs up, and subscribe. And of course, if you're going to be asking him questions on his projects, it sounds like getting in on the questions early is the best way to get responses from him. So subscribe and you can get his latest videos notifications for it.
A bit of shameless self-promotion there.
I'm more than happy to help you. I don't know if having 30 more subscribers is going to make a difference, but certainly the time you shared has made a difference to us. So thank you so much, Colin, for joining us.
That's been fun. Thanks for inviting me.